This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. When you think of classical music, you probably think of Beethoven and Mozart. But symphonies around the country are working on diversifying their programming, including highlighting living composers. Today, we speak to Hartford Symphony Orchestra music director Carolyn Kuan about her work as a conductor and her process when it comes to being mindful of representation both inside and outside of the orchestra space. But first up, Tyler Kline is a composer and host of The Modern Notebook, a radio program featuring the works of contemporary classical music. He's also host of the new podcast, Music/Maker with Tyler Kline, where he interviews living composers. Tyler, welcome to the show today.
Hi, Catherine. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, we're very glad that you're here too. And want to start the conversation by asking you if you can help us sort of understand and define contemporary classical music. What does that mean?
So I think it could mean maybe one of two things, and I'll tell you which definition I like a little better. One way is that we can think about it from maybe like an aesthetic or stylistic point of view. So that's when we think about like more experimental kinds of music. It's maybe more abstract and more challenging to listen to. But I really think that's sort of a narrow way of thinking about contemporary classical music. So the other way, and the one that I like better, and that's kind of just in the name, is that it's music being composed right now. So this is really what my program, Modern Notebook, has really focused in on. It's become really just music by living composers for the most part. I do play music by folks from the past, a little bit in the past,
Right.
but it's really become music written in the past 20 years and oftentimes music written in the past 5 years. So I think that really this is just a more inclusive way of looking at what contemporary music is, and it's thinking about the entire spectrum of what it could be a lot of things. It could be music that is inspired by traditional classical music. It could be inspired by jazz. It could be very experimental in nature. It could be noise-based, incorporate elements of pop music or hip hop or gospel or bluegrass even. I know composers who kind of incorporate like internet meme culture into their music. So I think the thing to remember is that composers, we live in the world that in the society and the culture that we all live in. And so we're all making music that responds to that, to the existence that we are living in. And we're also, no matter what the music might be like, we're in conversation with the past and the music that's been made before.
And I think it's because when we hear classical music, that already kind of limits what we think it is. But just by how you describe it, it's a lot broader than I think what it's meant to be, it sounds like. And so when we're talking about contemporary classical music, does it also mean featuring music of more diverse musicians and composers? Because we do have more access to them today.
Yeah, I think so. And I just want to preface this just by acknowledging that I'm a white male person, so I want to be very mindful not to center myself and speak too much on the behalf of underrepresented composers and non-white composers. So that being said, these are my observations that these people have always been here.
Right.
We have examples of, for example, Le Chevalier de Saint-Georges is a black composer who lived in Mozart's time, and we still get to enjoy his music today. And women composers have always been making music. And I think the word erasure kind of comes to mind. I think in a lot of cases, we've just based on how society and culture in the Western world, especially, has been over time. Maybe a lot of composers have slipped through the cracks. So there's Florence Price, for example, is a black woman composer from the early 20th century, and her music's been having a bit of a resurgence today because, in part because a box of her music and manuscripts was found in someone's attic at one point, kind of, a few decades ago. So when we talk about the diversity of composers, I think two catalysts that have really made us all as music programmers and curators to kind of think more about this and reflect on it. We had the Me Too movement in the murder of George Floyd, and I think after those two points in recent years, more organizations have been looking to the music of different kinds of people, rightfully so, and kind of we're kind of playing catch up.
Right.
Just now in the past couple of years, I'm seeing more music recorded and put on CDs by these composers, and I think that's a great thing. But as I often think about in my own curatorial thinking, and when I see organizations, performing arts organizations, I do think there's still a lot of work to be done. And so I think just trying our best to be aware of everything out there is the best thing we can do.
Well, we've got about 30 seconds here left, but with what you just said, what can orchestras do to make music more accessible?
I think just playing music that people can relate to, music that tells the stories of what we're all living through, and that's going to be from living composers.
Well, thank you so much, Tyler Klein. You've been listening to Tyler Klein, who's the composer and the host of The Modern Notebook. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Tyler. We must have you back.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And for our listeners, you can hear Modern Notebook on Connecticut Public Radio Saturday nights from 10 to midnight. He's also the host of the new podcast, Music/Maker. And coming up next, we'll hear from the Hartford Symphony Orchestra music director, Carolyn Kuan. This is Where We Live. Stay with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Carolyn Kuan has been the music director of the Hartford Symphony Orchestra since 2011. Born in Taipei, she was drawn to music at a young age. Today, we spoke about her past, her work as conductor, and the driving forces behind her music. I started our conversation by asking her about her origin story. I think you first got introduced to music because your brother was gifted a piano. Tell us about that experience and what kind of started this passion of yours.
I don't know. Actually, the truth be told is it's been a long journey when it comes to, passion. If anything, it's really a journey of discovery and journey of unknown, for what it's worth. Actually, we can talk a little bit more about that. But the piano story really is my brother got a piano for his 10th birthday, and being the younger sister I was 5 years younger than my brother. I quickly convinced my parents that I should be allowed to play the piano because I was going to be the next musician, pianist or something. But ultimately, really, I think it's, as you know, actually, do you play any instrument growing up?
I wasn't sure if I wanted to bring this up, but I did play the piano for a couple of years. And, I loved it, but I don't think it was the right time and age because I quickly lost interest.
How old were you?
Oh, man. I was under 10.
Okay.
I was under 10, so quite young. And I know that my parents did not really have any expectations per se. It's really just a hobby, discipline, and musical, right? And I think I enjoyed the musical aspect. I was not a very disciplined student.
Actually, it was exactly the same story with me. Actually,
all right, so I feel a little bit better.
So yes, I quickly convinced my parents I should be allowed to play this fancy piano that my brother just got. But ultimately, I found piano kind of lonely. I think I would have been better as a violinist, maybe. But, as you can probably relate to this, Asian parents, girls, a lot of Asian girls play the piano or violin is considered good upbringing so that we can get married off well, with some elegance and skills. So that's how music came into my life. But ultimately, actually, so I came to America when I was 14 years old, and really more of a rebellious result of being rebellious. And my middle school in Taiwan and my high school in America were sister schools for a few years, so they actively came recruited. And one summer, so I was selected to come study abroad, and basically involved, 2 weeks studying English and a week going to Disneyland and other places.
Naturally.
Right.
Right.
But I will never forget, because the very first day of school, the teacher said, feel free to ask questions. And you'll probably know this, having spent some time in the classroom in Taiwan, that you don't ask questions. Everything is memorization based. You sit there quietly, you take your notes, and you're tested on things. So as someone who is quite rebellious, who have a lot of questions, I thought, this is amazing. This is how one should learn. So I quickly applied to the high school behind my parents' back.
Wow.
Northfield Mount Herman School. And I got in, and I think I was having a fight with my mom that day. And I said, I'm leaving. I'm going to go to America for high school. Luckily, they were very supportive, as it turned out. And I'm very grateful, because had they not let me leave to come to America to study, I think I would have fought my parents the entire time. And my mom actually passed away a few years after. So I ended up, because I left, every time I go home, I end up being wanting to be very close to my mom. So I'm very grateful for those years. But even then, I went to Smith College and never thought I would be in music. I was supposed to be an investment banker.
That's quite the shift.
Yes.
Well, and I also think oftentimes there is that shift when you're on this path. So when did you know, or when did you get the idea that music is the way to go? Did you continue playing the piano the entire time, or did you take a break, or was it a spark of a moment and you were like, investment banking is not the way to go?
So it was actually very interesting. I think it was my junior year at Smith College, and I actually had a internship lined up in Taipei with Citibank. And that summer, one of my teachers pulled me aside, because I played the piano in a small school like Smith College. That meant I was helping with the sectional for the course, which meant I was sort of conducting or helping. So the teacher said, one of our alum, Susan Rose, gave 4 students scholarship to study music that summer. We think you should go study conducting. And when a student are given scholarship to go study something, you have to have something to show for it. So that summer I actually came to here in Hartford. At the time, the Hart School of Music had a program called the Conductors Institute. So that might have been my very first conducting experience. And then I went to Tanglewood to observe conducting work students. And then I went to Tufts to study French and German that summer. But when I came back to Smith, they put me in front of an orchestra. And I think I conducted Night and Day or something like that. And the alum thought I was talented and I should go learn about conducting. So I applied to a grad school in conducting, and I remember and I got a full scholarship, and I remember calling my dad and say, Dad, I can always come home and be a banker. Someone's literally paying me to go study music and conducting, and I know nothing about it. I have no idea what conducting is about. And I would love to take this opportunity, because once I go back to Taiwan to be a banker, I will never have this opportunity again. So that, in some way, I think that I miss my mom, but in some way, it's fortunate that Mom wasn't around as much anymore, because Mom would have said, no, come home to Taiwan. And Dad basically said, okay, do what you want. It's hard to resist,
Right.
daughters, what's that, daddy's daughter kind
Daddy's
of thing.
girl type of thing.
Right.
Well, I mean, they did gift a piano in your presence. So ultimately, they started this.
to my brother, and
Right.
and I would say, and then I got another scholarship to go to Peabody, and then my very first job was with the New York City Ballet as artist in residence. Even then, I thought, I really don't know what this conducting thing is about. You wave your arms, and so conducting, if you think about it, is one of those things that's really hard to learn, because you can only learn in front of a group of people.
So, I mean, that's a great question, because it's a question that I also wanted to ask, because I personally am not familiar with conducting. Did not realize you can go to school for conducting, just because we've had some conversations with musicians that eventually became a conductor. So it seems very much a natural progression for some, but turns out there's a lot of study. I mean, this is not a surprise, but turns out there's a lot of study behind going into conducting. And with what you're sharing, it feels very organic in some way, but it was kind of introduced to you as a very new concept, and you kind of like learned along the way. So I mean, during that process, you obviously wanted to stay in it. So what was it about this that attracted you?
I think it was less about that I wanted to stay in it, but more that the more I learned, the more questions I had.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
So when I was learning computer science, that's another one of the interests I had at Smith. It made sense. Or economics, it made sense. Music did not make sense. It just, there are so many questions, and as you get more answers, you have more questions. And I want to say it really wasn't so, even when I became an artist in resident at New York City Ballet, and then I went on to North Carolina Symphony, Seattle Symphony, I really wasn't sure this is what I should do, or that I will have something special to offer. And I think that's the question ultimately I keep coming back to, why do we do what we do? Why do you do what you do in many ways? Why are you still doing what you do?
Right.
And that's a question I constantly ask myself. So it really wasn't until I became the music director at Hartford Symphony, I finally called my dad and say, you know what, Dad, I don't think I'm coming home. I
Right.
don't think investment banking is going to do it for me, because I think what drives me more than anything is this desire to want to make a difference. And I often joke that if I weren't a conductor, I would probably end up in Yale School of Forestry, sort of conservation. And
Sure.
in some way, music is kind of inner conservation.
Sure.
In a way.
Yeah.
But
mean,
I still find, I still ask, why am I doing this? And what keeps me going?
well, it's the conservation of culture, history, and language, I think, to a certain extent. And I mean, you just listed out a bunch of orchestras that you were a part of. So how did you end up in Hartford? Is there something about the orchestra that you're like, that's what fits what I want to do? That's the philosophy that I follow? Are those things that you think about before you commit to a role like this?
I think Hartford is probably as close to where I grew up in America in some ways. I used to joke that between Northfield Herman School and Smith College, I know the Bradley International Airport really well. So when I saw Hartford was looking for a music director, I thought, of course, I have to apply. And there were, I think, something like 400 applicants, and it was a long process, 2-year process. In fact, I remember very clearly, they almost made it the American Idol version, so everybody there was this website, people could write their comments and thoughts, and I made sure not to look at it.
Wow, like an audience-based?
Yeah, an audience
Wow,
based.
okay.
So I don't recommend it, but hey, it's, whatever it takes for community engagement. But ultimately, Hartford Symphony had this wonderful board that was very supportive. They were very interested in my vision for the orchestra and what I care about. And in that sense, that's any music director's dream come true, or anyone's dream come true, to work for an organization that shares your vision and is supportive of what you want to do. And, in some ways, why are you here?
Right.
How did you end up here? Right. I mean, it's fascinating. Part luck, part destiny, part, making sure everything is sort of in place when you got here. And I've been here for 13 years.
So can you tell us about your vision and how has it changed over the 13 years? Because you were also here during the pandemic, which plays, I think, a really big role. Music played a really big role during that time too, right?
Yeah, I would say, interestingly, I feel like I know a lot more when I first started than I do now, if anything. If one could say, when I first started, I mean, I still believe the same thing, that the arts organization like the Symphony should be there to serve the community. And very much that has been my driving force. Is how do we make a difference? How do we connect with the community? So my very first concert, for example, was an open concert for the public. And we now have a Symphony in Park concert that is available for free for everyone. That happens right here in the Bushnell Park. And we actively seek partners. So we've worked with just about everyone you can think of: Hartford Stage, Wadsworth, New Britain Museum, anyone who has an interest to collaborate. We love collaboration. We love to highlight others and give space to others in the locally as well as other places. So very much it's been a journey of how do we serve this community. And I mentioned that I don't know as well anymore because I feel like our world is changing a lot. And it feels like there should be, you wonder if there is another component to it. So one of the areas I've been sort of spending more time thinking about is this idea that with the world ever more chaotic, music in many ways is the counterweight, in the sense that it's similar to yoga, to meditation. It's a vehicle, it's a really good first step to stepping back and not think as much or stop thinking altogether. And if you think about listening to music, it's about this note, the next note, the next note. And it's okay if your mind wanders, but you can always come back to the next note. And that's exactly what meditation in some ways is about. So more and more I'm thinking about how do I create experience? How do we create more opportunity for people to get to know music in the ways of getting to know their consciousness, getting to learn about not thinking, getting to using music as a way, as the counterweight to the chaotic craziness in the world.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people, including myself, would love some moments of not having to think about things. I think just give your brain a little break. And I think music is one of those unique avenues where it transcends culture, right? It transcends language. You don't need to understand a certain language to enjoy a piece of music. And of course, today we're talking more specifically about what's more traditional classical music. And you mentioned community so many times, wanting to be out there and to invite people in. So because the orchestra, I think even just hearing the phrase, it can be intimidating for some, right? I think the culture is changing a little bit, but like change, it's always a little bit like molasses sometimes. But, it's viewed as a very formal setting. You get dressed up, you wear a tux, you wear a gown. But it sounds like the Hartford Symphony Orchestra is taking a different approach. And especially with what you just shared, you want it to be more open to people. You tell people to dress exactly what they want to dress and clap when they want to clap. I know clapping can be a very controversial topic. But can you talk about the ways that you are working to make the orchestra more inclusive and accessible to audiences, to people?
So first of all, clap whenever you want. Really, I'm a firm believer of clap whenever you want. Yes, the person sitting next to you might look at you funny, but not at the Hartford Symphony. I think, having been there for as long as I have, we've created a culture of making people feel welcome, making people feel they can be however they want to be. And it is about a shared experience. But certainly the Hartford Symphony is not everything you just said. I mean, people come in jeans, people come in, if you want to dress up, great. If you want to dress down, great. The music we play, of course, has a huge range. I mean, on one hand, you can come see Harry Potter in concert, right, in music, or Star Wars, or Elf. I think we did this, Christmas. Or you can see amazing acrobat in symphony concert. In our summer concert at Talcott, people literally, if you're out on the lawn, you can bring your kids and they can be playing balls while you're sitting there enjoying some conversation with your friends while the music's going on. If you're furthering from the table. People enjoy sharing a meal with their friends while listening to music. The possibilities there are so many. We've tried to make sure we've had puppetry, we've had sort of actors, we've had live art. So it's definitely not what a typical person, I would say, think of a symphony orchestra. And if you look at me, I'm probably as far away from what you think of as a typical conductor. I don't know. What do you think of as a typical conductor?
I wanted to let our listeners know that currently neither of us are in a tuxedo or in a gown. So that's helpful.
Are you in Converse today?
I am not wearing Converse today. I am so sorry. I have been dinged on that multiple times. I'm going to need to work on that. But it's interesting because as you were talking, and I was thinking about this earlier as well, is I'm curious. I don't know if you can answer this, but when did that formality start? Because I'm also imagining if we had a video camera in any orchestra space in like the 19th, 18th, 17th century, I want to know, when do people clap? When are people laughing? When are people reacting to the performance? Because this kind of reminds me of Shakespeare, because Shakespeare wrote for the person. So, but over the years, it became a more sort of, a more formal form of literature to learn. But when in fact he actually wrote for the common person, and the common person was able to a certain extent attend these plays. So I'm wondering if orchestra has a similar
very much
trajectory.
So. I think so. I mean, certainly in Beethoven's day, nowadays, if you play the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, bum, 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 you have to play the Beethoven Fifth Symphony. But in Beethoven's time, literally, you could play the first movement of the Beethoven Fifth and then play the second movement of the Beethoven Seventh, and it wasn't this rigid. That's why I'm a firm believer of people clapping. I mean, the opera world, people still clap when the soprano sings an amazing high notes. So somewhere along the line, it became a more serious thing. And again, there's nothing wrong with that too. I think it's just making the experience what you want it to be. But also, as I mentioned, a lot of it also is what people think of symphonies offering is, you have this person very serious, deciding what to play. When in fact, the Hartford Symphony, our offering is very much, in some ways, community-driven more and more. So our next year, we have a project with Terence Blanchard, and it actually was sort of, the idea actually came up in a meeting with the Greater Hartford Arts Council president, Shelley Best. And so I always love it when the idea came from the community and they say, why don't you guys do this? And it was a way to engage the people that live here and that have an interest in this. And so more and more, I think it takes a music director that is interested in what the community wants. It's a fine balance. I mean, if you think about Steve Jobs, he would say, well, but, you have to give the people the thing they don't even know they want. But it's a balance. It's about introducing people to fascinating things that will maybe open their minds, but it's also about giving people what they want. I kind of joke sometimes. It's not quite relevant, but, sometimes it's about, my grandmother has this favorite saying, I know what I like, and I like what I know.
Right. Wisdom.
I don't know.
Grandma knows.
Right. Or
right.
The food. Like we keep going back to the restaurant we love.
It's a comfort to it.
Comfort. So there's something about it. But there's also, it's nice when we discover something we didn't know that we like. So it's programming is a fascinating conversation that can go on. In some ways, how do you decide which guests to have?
Right. Well, I love that because I actually grew up listening to a lot of classical music, but I can't tell you who played what and when. But so I did grow up with it, and fortunately for myself, I enjoy it. I still enjoy it. But actually, there was a moment that I had a much better, a different appreciation for Mozart, because a couple years ago I was reading this book. And it's just letters that Mozart wrote to his father when he was studying, I believe, in Austria. So they were writing letters. And did you know that Mozart is a huge fan of toilet humor?
I'm not surprised.
And that just, because for someone who is unfamiliar with that space, when I was reading, I was like, that just made him more human. And I never saw him the same way again. I
Yeah.
never listened to him the same way again.
I mean, I will hope that as artists, and I know you talk to a lot of artists, right? I mean, for arts, music, anything to be relevant, it has to almost have various different components. On one hand, there's that component that is beyond the world, sort of, take you to a whole different place. On the other hand, it's things that you can absolutely relate to.
Right.
And it's a combination of the two, what moves you. It's hard to say. And
Right.
of course, when you have an audience of 1,000, 2,000, how do you create an experience that moves everybody? And there's something about shared experience, though. It's probably the same reason, people go to church or people go do yoga together. And when you're together having a shared experience, there's a vibration that is kind of enhance the experience and makes it that much more special. And kind of coming back to your comment earlier about, this shared language. And it's a language that you don't have to describe. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what you believe. Maybe enjoying a piece of music is one of the few ways we can all still come together despite our disagreement in the world. Maybe.
My guest today was Carolyn Kuan, music director at the Hartford Symphony Orchestra. Coming up, we talk about how the orchestra is striving to become more inclusive and diverse, and what that work looks like. This is Where We Live. Stay with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. My guest today is Hartford Symphony Orchestra music director Carolyn Kuan. Like many organizations, Hartford Symphony Orchestra has put forth diversity and inclusivity commitments, stating that they are diversifying programming by considering race, ethnicity, and gender identity in the composers whose music that we perform. With this mission in mind, I asked Maestro Kuan how composers and music are chosen.
When you think about diversity and inclusivity, you try to include everybody, of course. And that could mean something as simple as having composers that have very different backgrounds. And we make sure that the music we're presenting are by a variety of composers. Of course, you still have to make sure the audience, they can for Mozart and Beethoven still get what they want. But we make sure that we really try to have an inclusivity when in terms of programming. But in terms of, we actually have a new program, musicianship fellowship, that's specifically open to underserved representation for two violin, viola, cellists that will be designated for underserved community for them to join us. So hopefully also to make sure that when people come to the symphony, they see the representation as well. And I, of course, as I mentioned, I'm kind of atypical for those people that are just listening and don't know anything about me. I'm Asian. Not so young anymore.
You're still young.
I'm also part of the LGBTQIA community. And so, representation is important. But what's fascinating, actually, I should share that I just did an opera called An American Soldier in New York City for the inaugural season of the Performing Arts Center at the World Trade Center. And the story is an Asian American story. And what that does is it forces the casting to have Asian singers. So in some ways, it's not about inclusivity. I mean, it is, but it's about opening opportunity so that it's easy for director, music director, casting manager to just go out and engage the people that are already famous, the people who are already known. It's easy to just find a violinist, a conductor that people know or easy to find. But when you have to or have a mission to make sure you care about inclusivity and diversity, what it does is it gives more opportunities for the people. You actually have to work harder to give opportunity to those that normally wouldn't have those opportunity. And I think that's part of the process, and hopefully the audience will appreciate that. I don't know. I'm still waiting to find out, I suppose.
Right. And then when you have that nuance, it's with that sensitivity, I think you look at the process, you look at yourself a little differently. And the New York Times reported that in one recent study found that works by Asian composers make up only about 2% of American orchestral performances planned for the coming season. And so we've been talking about, you were born in Taiwan, but you've had education both in the U.S. and in Taiwan. You have an expertise in many different kinds of music, including Asian music, contemporary works, and also with the traditional classical works in mind here too. How, especially with what you just shared with the casting and now your role as conductor and music director, how does your background inform the work that you do?
Interesting, as an artist who loves West classical music, early on, I mean, my focus was very much in European music. I mean, that's when you think of classical music, that's what it is. And the irony is, in the classical world, you often have people say, we're doing Russian music, so we have to have a Russian conductor or a Russian instrumentalist. We're doing French work, we have to have a French conductor. So what does that mean for an Asian artist? Does that mean you're only good at Asian music?
Right.
I mean, you're an Asian journalist. Does that mean you're only good at Asian stories?
Right.
So, I mean, does our experience inform our worldview? Absolutely. I mean, but it's much bigger than that. I think we have a understanding of what it's like for people who feel like they're the minority. We know what it feels like to feel fear because of how we look. We certainly have more direct knowledge when it comes to our heritage and background. But I think it's much more complex than that. It's hard to just say, you're Asian and therefore you're only good at Asian music. I think that's very dangerous. And in fact, as we talk about diversity, I think it's really important for us to, in every walk of life, to always keep that in mind, that just because someone looks a certain way, has a certain background, does not mean that that's the only thing they're good at. But of course, we engage, our upcoming Spark concert. We have the African drumming with the Friends world music. We are Celebrate America. We'll have a Latin band, and so it's. I think the older I get, I think all the things in the world feels much more multidimensional than a simple answer. Right. And more, I always come back to, I don't know, but let's keep an open mind and let's always try to do the right thing. Let's have the integrity to try to do the right thing, and try to make a difference, and hope that brings people in, and hope that is meaningful to people.
I mean, that was certainly a question that I think we can take about a whole week and still not be able to digest and unpack everything behind that. But because of that nuance, because of that sensitivity and background, it's interesting to see how that influences your decisions, right? And sort of along the same vein, you recently held a young artist competition. So can you talk about, where that's a different kind of diversity there, age, and talk a little bit about what does it look like to both sort of pass on the classical music passion to the next generation, or to support the young people who already have an interest but just maybe needs that extra support or the extra push, or just to say that you can do it. What does that look like for you now?
For me, working with young artists is always extremely satisfying and exciting. They bring into this fresh excitement that either some of us have forgot or isn't as in touch, and how amazing that there are these young people who are excited about classical music and what that might mean. And for us, as a main symphony orchestra in the region, Hartford Symphony is the second largest symphony orchestra in New England after the Boston Symphony. So we have a certain responsibility too to support the young people that are amazing and fantastic. And people are constantly getting better and better. And for us to work with young people and provide opportunity really is just one of the most rewarding things we can do. And really, it's both way. Yes, we're providing opportunity. We're giving their possible first experience to be a soloist in front of an orchestra. But also, we get a lot back as well. I probably, similar to mentorship in all walks of life, right?
I love having young people on the air. We've had quite a few Gen Zers on since my tenure, and do want to give more voices to young people. But every time they're on, I'm just amazed. Because when I was 15 years old, I was not doing that. I was not on live radio talking about mental health, about school, about politics, about their future, about admissions. Those are not things that I was talking about live. And it's so amazing. And I feel very similar. I feel very invigorated, and I feel very hopeful. And I must admit that disconnect is going to start being larger and larger. So I really hope that I can continue to be as connected as possible by opening up the airwaves for them and to connect in that way. And so, with you working with young people and having them involved, what's their reaction like? Do they like coming in? Are they excited? Or I can kind of feel the energy already, even just by you describing your experience.
I think young artists, of course they're excited. For many of them, it's their first time playing with an orchestra, literally in front of an orchestra.
Right.
So that's a little bit different. But so for me, it's also just, they're the ones that are going to keep doing this and maybe do things the same, maybe do things differently. And also they're the ones that I'm fascinating about how, we need them in many ways also to connect with the audience that are younger, possibly.
Right.
So again, everything is not a straight answer. Everything is multifaceted. And, how do we support them so that we can also learn from them?
And can you also talk about this upcoming season with the orchestra? What will make it stand out, and what can we look forward to?
So for me, it really is a continuation of everything we believe in, making the music experience open to everybody and in as many different environment as possible. It's a place that's welcoming. It's a place that you can just come and forget about the world. You can talk about the world too, and I certainly try to do some of that sometimes, because I feel like as an artist, there's a responsibility for us to speak the truth through our art. But it's a balance between that and creating an oasis where people can come and just stop thinking. So It's a combination. Of course, our next season is a large season where we have the Blanchard Project. We have actually Shelley Best narrating Peter and the Wolf. People would typically say, gosh, really? You're going to put Peter and the Wolf on the main concert series? Isn't that for kids? But my reaction is, why not? It's a piece people love. And we paired that with a symphony of meat and potato, his Fifth Symphony and stuff. So there's always a lot of different program. I would just say, if you've never been to a symphony, it's not what you think. And definitely, come check it out. And you might be surprised. So
Well, and we've covered a lot
Yes.
of topics in this conversation. Any final thoughts that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Gosh, there's so many things one could say. The one thing that's constantly on my mind these days is just gratitude, actually. It's the one thing I feel like there's a lot of good in the world. Yes, there's a lot of issues in the world too, but there's a lot of gratitude. And for me, I'm just grateful to be able to hear, to have a conversation with you, to get to know you. I'm grateful for everybody that's listening to this program and supporting the wonderful work you do. And just in everyone listening, just find a moment to be grateful. And I think music is a big part of my life, and I would like to share that with everyone. And I think, music kind of leads to gratitude as well. But really just, connect with your consciousness and be grateful. And if music is a part of it, wonderful. If not, whatever it is, gratitude.
My guest today was Maestro Carolyn Kuan. You can find links and more information on the Hartford Symphony Orchestra on our website, ctpublic.org/wherewelive. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you so much for listening.